Hi guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome back to my channel. I've got tea steeping, I'm in my comfy chair, and that means I'm ready to talk about my Q3 stats and favorites. First off, how? How is it the final quarter of the year already? My partner actually had the audacity to say that Christmas was really far away still last night, but you'd think you could say that about June, and it feels like it just happened, and or like the end of June, and that feels equally far away from Christmas. Secondly, this last quarter or Q3, whatever, the third quarter of the year kind of sucked reading-wise for me, and it's actually not any of the book's faults, but I just feel like I made some reading choices that I didn't actually enjoy. And even though I knew that I wasn't enjoying them in the moment, I continued to make those same choices over and over again. And that's something that I'm really reflecting on going into the end of the year and into next year, and sort of how I am spending my time reading and wanting to make more thoughtful choices in the books that I read and the time that I have to read. But I think I'm going to have another video where I talk more about my reading habits and how I'd like some of those things to change in the future. So first things first, let's get into some numbers. I read 31 books in the last 3 months, and I DNF'd 1 book. This is roughly 10 books a month, and that feels about on trend with how this year has been going for me so far in reading quantity. But where and how and what was I reading? So we'll start off with the genre breakdown. For fantasy books, I only read 7 books. I read 6 young adult, 5 of which of those were young adult fantasy, but 1 just young adult. I read 15 romance books. I do have a breakdown. 10 of those were contemporary romance, 1 historical romance, and 4 fantasy romance. And then I read 1 middle grade, 1 sci-fi, and 1 classics. So just under half of what I read was romance books. Generally, I find that I enjoy romance books in the moment when I'm looking for something that doesn't feel like a big commitment, that maybe I'm in the mood that I just want to read a little bit, but I don't want to dive into a heavy fantasy. And I binged a lot of romance books in the end of August and early September. And this really skewed my numbers more heavily towards fantasy. So this really has affected how I felt about this reading quarter. So for the breakdown on where I read books, I read 14 books from the library, 13 books from Scribd. I did buy 3 books, and that was 2 Kobo books and 1 physical book. And this is on track with my general goal of buying no more than 1 book a month. And then the last, I read 1 book, as I will always put this into the other category, and that means that I borrowed it from my mom actually. And that breaks down to 45% library, 42% Scribd, less than 10% were bought or other. Okay, so series. I started 10 series this quarter, which means 10 of the books that I read were the beginning of a new series, but I will say I actually actively plan to not continue the majority of them. I finished 3 series and I caught up on 2 series. So overall, I'm sort of breaking that down as to that I started 10 series and I, got caught up or finished in at least 5. And then finally, I have seen some other channels share their breakdown in terms of male versus female authors, which I will do again as well. This quarter, I only actually read 3 books by a male author, and the rest of the books I read by female authors. I don't normally share my ratings with you, specifically my Goodreads ratings, and that's because I think ratings are such a personal preference thing, but I wanted to this time just because I do feel like it was such a bad quarter. I only gave 1 5-star book, which is not atypical for me. I am primarily a 4 and 3-star rater, which shows in these numbers. I gave 12 books a 4, but even then I don't feel like I really struggled to pick 5 favorites from the quarter. I also gave 12 books a 3, and I gave 6 books a 2-star, making the overall average on Goodreads for this past quarter 3.25, which I think is pretty low for me, just simply because I don't think I normally give out that many 2s. Okay, my tea is finally ready. So So let's get into my favorites from the quarter. As I said, it was a really big struggle, honestly, to even describe 5 books from the past 3 months as being a favorite. There are some that are absolutely new favorites, but I kind of struggled to get at least 5. Last quarter I had, I think, 3 honorable mentions, and this time I'm kind of even including the 5th one as like, I don't think this is like a favorite, but I'm going to include it here anyway. But we'll get into it. So we'll start with number 5. I do have them in order. So the 5th book here, I would say, is The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. And this is one that I feel like, I don't know if I would describe it as a favorite, to be honest. I enjoy it and I enjoy the story, but there are definitely some issues with this book. Yeah. The Last Graduate is the 2nd book in the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik. The first book was A Deadly Education. I do have a full video talking about A Deadly Education and how these books are rather unique and how these are not going to be for everyone. I feel like I really enjoyed the book. For the most part, the ending, the very final moment in the book has taken up permanent residence in my brain and has been interrupting me at several points in the last week since finishing this book. Like in the middle of reading other books, I'm suddenly replaying the final scene from this book in my head. But overall, there are definitely some issues with this book. I do think it is really suffering from middle book syndrome, and the writing style is very different in these books and something that I maybe overlook because I'm enjoying the story and the characters as much as I am. But I'm really enjoying this series. I do really want to know what happens. I'm just still reeling a little bit from my experience of reading The Last Graduate so far. Favorite number 4 on the list from the past quarter is A House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. It is just like such a warm hug. It is a really adorable story about a man who works in sort of like magical child social work management sort of, and he goes to this one orphanage that is a little bit more dangerous or like risky than the others in sort of a trial period, and he is supposed to assess whether or not all of the kids are safe. And oh man, like without going into spoilers, it is just the most adorable, sweetest book ever. This is like a cozy, cold day, want to sit inside with a cup of tea and just smile and laugh. It's kind of a story. I think that it was a little bit heavy-handed in some regards, in some of the messaging, but I do think it was just so sweet. I fell in love with so many of the kids. Like Talia and Lucy and Chauncey were absolutely like some of my favorite child characters in books that I've read in a really long time. Favorite number 3 on the list is Her Wicked Marquess by Stacey Reid. This is the historical romance that I bought as an ebook spontaneously based on the recommendation from Amanda at the channel The Naughty Librarian. The main character is someone who would sort of self-describe herself as a wallflower. She's getting close to old maid status. I think she's in her early to mid 20s. And her parents are trying to force her into a marriage with a much older man who is kind of horrible. So she starts a fake rumor about herself that this Marquess guy, who's like a big rake in the town, snuck into her room and kissed her. So she starts this rumor, it didn't happen, to ruin her reputation, to hopefully sabotage this arranged marriage. And the rake hears about it and thinks it's kind of funny, and he actually then does climb into her window to meet her, and it was such a great romance. There is an interesting Count of Monte Cristo revenge side plot with the Marquess in this story, Nicholas I think his name is, which was actually really great, and it tied in with the main story quite well. I thought that their romance was really adorable. Like, they have these late night chats, which it's all very scandalous, of course, and kind of get to know each other, and both sort of pretending that it's something other than it is. Like, he's pretending that he's just there to protect her. But it's also quite spicy for historical romance. I find a lot with historical romances in particular, there's usually like a certain standard or like something that has to be met in order for there to be any spice. Like, they have to have this like random arranged marriage for something, like a marriage of convenience, or if she's a widow, like all these things to like make it be okay that they're having sex, and that kind of flies out the window on this one, but it was much appreciated. Favorite number 2 from the quarter is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This was my first John Gwynne read, and it was a success, but I will say it was really, really slow to get there for me. I don't want to say bored, but I wasn't quite feeling the hook until a pretty significant portion of the way into the book. Probably 2/3, if not 3/4 of the way in, I wasn't completely vibing with some of the characters. That we follow 3 characters, a escaped slave, and then 2 female, like Viking-esque warriors, one of whom is retired and into the more of the family life, and then the other one who's actively like I forget what they were called, but like she's a Viking. She's not a Viking, but she's touring around and fighting. But when this book hooked me, oh man, was I A, glad that I continued, also B, like so appreciative of everything else that had happened in the book up to that point. Even though it was a little bit slower and hadn't gripped me, it was all building into this amazing world setting. Are you going to know exactly what weapons every character has on their body at any given time? Yes. Will you get a lot of details about the food that they're eating? Also surprisingly, yes. But it's sort of a reimagined retelling of the Ragnarok, or like world after Ragnarok, which was the Norse god like apocalypse. The battle between the gods almost destroyed the world. And there's like a mystery with kids going missing. It's a whole thing. It's amazing. This made me put Malice back on hold at the library because I was so impressed by John Gwynne's writing. And now finally, book number 1. My favorite book from the quarter so far. I have not had a chance to talk about it yet on the channel because I read it after my recent wrap up, and that is Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, the second book in the Live Ship Traders series. Oh man, you guys. This series is so freaking good. This book was so amazing. Like, I really, really liked Ship of Magic. I really did. But in Ship of Magic, we spent a decent amount of time with characters that I either didn't care about or that I actually just hated. And in this book, the page time that were given to like really horrible people that I didn't care about was better. In particular, Kyle, like he just didn't get as much page time dedicated to him than he had in the first book, and so that was a really big relief. And then even though we were still with characters who maybe aren't necessarily my favorite in the series so far, like Wintro and Malta, for example, they were just better. Like, they weren't as horrible as they were in the first book, or at least maybe I understood them more. It is a lot less heavy, I'm finding, than I felt in maybe not the Farseer, like maybe it was Tawny Man or Fitz and the Fool that I found really depressing. Just like Fitz's story goes to a really dark place at a certain point. And Live Ship Traders is a lot lighter, I think, but still heavy. Like, there's still stuff is going wrong. You still feel like, oh no, oh no, oh no, as things are happening. We also have so many different perspectives. And sometimes you want something to happen for this person, but that's exactly the opposite of what you want for the other person. And it's like those two things can't both happen because you're seeing such a rounded perspective of events. Robin Hobb is just the master of character writing. All of the characters are really flawed, but you still really feel for them. There's a really cool element with the magic that is starting to really build that was a little bit confusing in the first book related to these live ships. And there was this weird thing happening with these like sea serpents in the first book. Still is continued into the second book, but it's starting to make a lot more sense. It's really, really cool to see everything suddenly fitting together. Even though I don't love hearing about the serpents, to be honest, like in those chapters, there was not a single moment in this book when I was bored or uninterested in anything that was happening, even when I was with characters I don't particularly like. Anyway, moral of the story is, Mad Ship was so amazing, and if you haven't read Live Ship series and you are a character reader, you absolutely have to. You just do. Maybe read Farseer first, just to give yourself the option to continue on in the realm of the Elderlings if you would like. Anyway, that is it for me today, guys. I'd love to hear how the third quarter went for you reading-wise and what your favorite book from the past 3 months has been as well. Do you have any books that you absolutely want to get to in the next 3 months? Oh my god, how is there only 3 months left in this year? That's crazy. Well, I will see you next time. Thanks for joining in today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.